Okay, we'll get ourselves positioned. Roll call, please.
Councillor Mackey.
Present.
Councillor Gamble.
Present.
Councillor Burley.
Present.
Councillor Carlton.
Present.
Councillor McQueen. Councillor Desai.
Present.
Councillor Patterson. Present. Warden Hicks.
Here.
Councillor Clumpus sends her regrets. Councillor Kentner.
Present.
Councillor Keaveney.
Present.
Councillor Body sends his regrets. Councillor Thomas. Councillor O'Leary.
Present.
Councillor Woodbury.
Present.
Councillor Millen.
Present.
Councillor Soever. Councillor Bartnicki.
Present.
Councillor Robinson.
Present.
Councillor Hutchinson.
Present.
Oops. I need to turn
Oh,
yours
I'm
off.
sorry.
It's all right.
There you go.
There. We'll get it right. Okay, is there any declaration of, I should be saying, interest?
We'll get that.
Seeing none, we will proceed. Looking at item 5.
Well, we're gonna go to
We're going to go straight to, okay, yes, we have some visitors. So, Council, with your leave, I would like to jump straight to good news and celebrations, because we have some visitors here, if you don't mind. Item number 9, and some presentations to be made. No?
The first one isn't here yet. but
Not,
the
okay.
paramedics are-
We're going to deal with the paramedics. Kevin, yes?
Good morning, Warden, County Council. It's my pleasure to be here today to recognize our paramedics. Everybody in our service does a fine job day in and day out, but it's sometimes special to get together and recognize the great efforts that they do. So we have a couple different, three different awards today. One is Exemplary Service, and 2 are from our base hospital. So we'll start with the Exemplary Service Medal. So I'll get Sean and Heather and Rob Gibbs to come up. So this year in Windsor, these paramedics, they were honored with their Exemplary Service Medal. And the Exemplary Service Medal, it's our profession's most distinguished honor. It was established in 1994. The medal is one of Canadian honors overseen by the Chancellery of Honors, a branch of the Office of the Secretary of the Governor-General. And to be eligible for the award, the individual must have completed at least 20 years of service. 10 years must be involved in potential risk, which we call street view, where they're out working on the road. The medal recognizes professionals in the provision of pre-hospital emergency medical services to the public who have performed their duties in an exemplary manner, characterized by good conduct, industry, and efficiency. And I can't be more thankful and more proud of these 3 paramedics. First paramedic is Heather Fortney-Wilson. She's worked pretty much her whole career in Grey, a bit outside of it, but mostly out of the Hanover base. And Rob Gibbs, he's worked pretty much his whole career here as well, a bit in Bruce County too. And but out of the One Sound base, and Sean Clegis as well, he's a supervisor with us, and he's pretty much spent his whole career too. So we're very proud of them, of their achievement, and it's quite an award to get that honor, because it's not just a long service award, it's exemplary service, not just doing your work as a paramedic, but also work in the community as well. That's a very strong component of getting this award, so we're very proud of them. The warden has some certificates here for you. You guys can move too. Yeah.
Thanks. Oh, yeah. Great.
The next paramedic, Scott couldn't be with us here today, but Scott has already received his exemplary service medal, and but he'll be recognized at Queen's Park on November 28th. He'll have 30 years of service, and he'll actually have a celebration down there that he'll be there in person to get his award from them. So the next award is from our base hospital, and Dr. Don Eby, who is our medical director, he's here and he's going to present these awards. These awards originate from calls that have taken place, and they're calls that that were very difficult for the paramedics, and but they did a really good job at dealing with them and handling them, and so each year they select different paramedics throughout the services across the Southwest region, and this year actually 2 crews were selected for awards from Grey County, so very proud of that because it doesn't happen every year that we get 2 awards in the same time. So I'll invite Don up to, he's going to talk about it and do the presentations.
Thank you, Kevin. And Warden and Council, it's my pleasure to be here today to represent the Southwest Ontario Regional Base Hospital Program. Just for your information, we are the group that provides the medical oversight for the paramedics. And I've been involved with the program for 23 years now, and every year we attempt to pick out of a whole bunch of calls and instance or an example where paramedics have gone above and beyond what they would normally do. And as we all know, paramedics are there for us 24 hours a day, 365 days a year, and so it's very difficult to pick one call, but this year we've chosen one call, especially from Grey County, which occurred back in August of this year, where a hiker, or not a hiker, a climber, fell at Metcalf Rock. And if anyone's ever been to Metcalf Rock, you know it's off the road, and this person actually fell about 40 feet and hurt his back. And so the first crew who were there, with the help of the local fire department, ended up having to bring this guy down onto level ground, get him stabilized, and then carry him out, at least till they could get to an ATV. The whole process took about 2.5 hours. It involved carrying all their equipment in, stretchers, all the equipment over rough terrain. And the 2 paramedics, the 2 primary paramedics who were involved, provided care for this fellow, wanted to stay on, and so we certainly want to recognize them for the excellence that they displayed in this call. We also recognize that in emergency medical services, none of us work alone, and there's always a group of people who are there, and we work as a team. So although we don't have anybody from the fire department, I would also like to recognize them. But there are supervisors and people sometimes who are in the background, and so we would like to recognize the 2 supervisors who were there helping with this. One of them was involved in the actual extrication themselves, and the other tried to coordinate the care, where they attempted to get search and rescue, attempted to get orange, and unfortunately neither of those agencies were able to respond, and so this is what made this call even more difficult. So we would like to recognize all of the paramedics who were involved. So Kevin, I guess we'll start with this. So if, yeah, okay. So if we could ask Zolt Popik, Finn Carroll, who was, I think, supposed to be here, but unfortunately hasn't come today. Sean Clegis gets to come back. Mark Urquhart. We would also like to recognize Jacob Kelly, who is a student being preceptored that day. Fortunately, he was there to witness this and get some experience. So we would also like to recognize his help. Everybody know to do this, okay. Jacob?
Yeah, just leave pens here. Great, thank you.
Okay, the second award I would like to be able to present today is the Medical Director's Commendation Award. This is kind of like second place. Both calls were equally meritorious, and it was very difficult to make the decision. So this call also involved a rescue. It seems as rural residents, we understand that some things happen in rural areas that we just don't see in the cities. And so this also involved a recreational mishap where someone was flying a light plane and ended up crashing into a fence near Katy. And it took a while for the crash to be noticed, and once it was noticed and the paramedics were called, it also involved a difficult extrication that where the person had to be carried out about 1 kilometer. And again, it was very difficult to make a decision about one or the other. They were sort of equal. But and again, if I would ask Andrew Brown and Sean Clegus to come forward again. I'd also like to note that Darren Clock was the other paramedic who was involved in the call, and he wasn't able to come today.
Great.
I'd like to just thank the council again for the opportunity to come here today to present these awards in public. It really means a lot to us in EMS to receive the recognition from the council as well, so I appreciate it. Thank you very much.
Anne-Marie can go now too, Heather.
Oh, okay, good.
Well, before we call Anne-Marie, I just want to thank everyone for attending once again. It's so nice to be able to recognize our paramedics. I'm a little bit biased. My son is now budding in a career and hoping to get into paramedic work. And Metcalf Rock, actually, I recall it being called Mitchell's Rock, back in the day, and I would take kids camping along the Bruce Trail, and we would do rock climbing with them there, and so I know the terrain and the turf that you would have been working in, and I just want to say thank you very much for the service that you provide to us day in and day out. Anne Marie.
I'm new, right? Yep. It is my pleasure to recognize Ken Thompson as recipient of the Lifetime of Achievement Award through the Ontario Not-for-Profit Housing Association. This award recognizes people who have dedicated their careers and talents to Ontario's nonprofit housing sector and are retiring after 20 or more years of dedication. Ken joined the board of directors for the Owen Sound Municipal Nonprofit Housing Corporation in 1989 and has continued to sit on the board most of the time as chair until his recent retirement. Since 1989, Ken led Owen Sound Municipal Nonprofit through 4 builds of affordable housing. For the first build, Ken researched and sought to purchase land through the federal surplus lands reserves. By doing so, he opened up previously non-service section of Owen Sound. This provided a significant growth opportunity for the city of Owen Sound and also provided 90 units of family, single, and senior and accessible townhouses. Even in 1990, creating an inclusionary housing community for all was his vision and his passion. That vision and passion remains today. In late 2006, when the province announced the Affordable Housing Program, Ken recognized the need for affordable seniors and accessible housing focusing on aging-in-place technologies. The end result was the Blue Water Ridge development, 61 and 2-bedroom apartments, 30 of which are fully or partially accessible, built on prime land overlooking Georgian Bay and with close access to walking trails, transportation, and medical facilities. Recently, Ken and his board purchased land and are completing a 90-unit affordable housing building built for seniors, singles, and families known as Ottawa Heights. Ken has always felt that all persons should have the opportunity to reside in communities in which they would learn, thrive, and be part of a community. Whether 16 or 80 years of age, regardless of income level, Ken knew that having a safe and comfortable home is the fundamental need of everyone's life. His philosophy of "we will only build what we ourselves would live in" has become the motto of the corporation. Ken's vision and enthusiasm have been embraced by board members, staff, and staff from other organizations, myself included, who have been fortunate enough to work with Ken. His belief in the love for his community resonates in every build that he has been part of. It is my honor to present Ken Thompson with the OMFA Lifetime of Service Award. Please come forward, Ken.
Thank you, Anne Marie.
My pleasure. We're going to get a picture with the award.
Well, Warden, we've met before.
Would you like to say a few words?
Yes.
Do we have a mic?
The mic will,
This one right in here.
okay.
Thank you. An award like this doesn't happen just to the chair of a committee over a period of years. I worked with a group of people, some of whom were city councillors, and many of people were devoted to their communities, having put a lot of volunteer hours in various other directions. It hit me sometime back when I was chair of the Children's Aid Society, when I realized that housing was a major underscoring problem. And so we, along with my group and the city councils of the time, and of course the compliance of Grey County Council, we're able to do what seems, in many ways, looking back, a kind of miracle. We built all of those programs with enthusiasm and with a lot of hands-on. My group insisted on checking everything from where the nails went to how you could adequately work a handicapped kitchen. The model that I have used always is the model of the Mayor of Owen Sound, Eddie Sargent, and of course Eddie was later on the MPP for this area, who in 1950 took his council to task and said, we need to build social housing for the veterans that are coming back, for a number of widows that were looking for housing, and so he built the Frank Smith apartments, and he was the major instigator of that. And so in 1950, the Owen Sound Housing Company was invented, and further on, Mayor Over Jackson continued the theme, and he set up the Owen Sound Municipal Nonprofit Housing. The two are separate groups, and sometimes it is confusing to a newcomer as to what particular agency is being discussed, because my committees wore two hats, and it's often awkward and somewhat peculiar to try and do that. But they were committed to improvement of housing in Grey County, improvement of the lives of so many people. And I think that is the thing that warms my heart, and the thing that encourages me that everybody should put their bit into community volunteering, because we owe the community some of the things to give it back, because I have had a marvelous time in Grey County and Owen Sound, and this was my way of saying thank you. Thank you. Okay.
Well, that's the feel-good part of the meeting, isn't it? Ken, it's so great to honor him and the service that he's done as a young person. I grew up in what was called Ontario housing. You remember those? Ontario housing? Anyways, and he and I also have something in common, that we were both past chairs of the Children's Aid Society. So I know he's done tremendous work in the community. Thank you very much. Okay, moving on with our meeting. We're back, I think, to item 5, right? So we're looking at 5A, adoption of a council and committee of the whole minutes dated October 24th. I need a mover, please. put it on the floor. Moved by Councillor Bartnicki, seconded by Councillor Hutchinson. Is there any discussion about these minutes? Then I'll call the question. All those in favor? Are there any opposed? That is carried. Thank you very much. Item 5B is Committee of the Whole closed meeting minutes dated October 24th, 2019. Could I get a mover, please? Moved by Councillor Mackey, seconded by Councillor Carlton. Any discussion? We'd have to go into close, wouldn't we? I'll call the question. All those in favor? Any opposed? That is carried. Thank you. And thirdly, item 5C, the long-term...
It's okay, go on, carry on. Sorry.
Are you moving? Okay. And seconded by Councillor Robinson.
This is
Are
where we
we-
do need to have some discussion.
We will need to have some discussion then, right? And do we need to,
I think if
Councillor Burley?
Burley, yes, to say that we need to discuss Grey Gables.
Oh, my apologies.
Thanks, Mr. Warden. Yes, I think we should have some further discussion on what's going on with Grey Gables. And I think the CAO and Kevin would probably lead that discussion.
Good morning, Council. After our last discussion with regards to an application for long-term care beds at the Grey Gables site, one of the pieces of work that we did as a matter of follow-up was to ask Gloss and Associates, a company out of Windsor that specializes in these kinds of builds, to take a look at that site and give us their best assessment of what could fit on the property. I think as we mentioned the last time, the property at Grey Gables, given the need to also accommodate all of the hospital's requirements, the Grey Gables footprint itself is quite tight. And so we wanted to get a professional kind of estimation of how things could be laid out and how everything could fit on the property. When you're putting a long-term care facility, if it turned out that what we moved forward with was a new long-term care facility on the Grey Gables site, that would need to have its own entrance and such like. So, you know, there's just some other considerations. The other piece is about the parking that's there. If you can zoom out just a little bit, Tara, it can show people a little easier how this all, the other out. There, a little bit more, a little bit more. So you see the existing 3 wings of the current Grey Gables facility. And then what they've added there to show what 232 unit resident home area, what that would look like. So you've got the 232s on either side there, and then a central area that would be the kitchen and that's those central amenities, and then some connection between the two buildings. So that gives you a sense of what can fit. If you scroll down a little bit, Tara, you can see like we're displacing a large amount of parking with this layout. So new parking would need to be constructed, what is that, north of where the south, the other north, where the current parking is. We also believe that in our discussions with Grey Bruce Health Services, I think you know, if we were to proceed in this manner, that we would be having more fulsome discussions with them about how parking could work on this site, so that we're, you know, taking the most advantage of the property that is available and trying to do this in an efficient manner. So that was the first piece that we wanted to show you. We just needed to know what can fit. And so those 32 resident home area pods, then depending on what the decision was about what you wanted to build, they could simply be stacked one on top of another. So is there any questions about that specific piece before I move on? No? Oh, yes.
So can you just zoom in again? So that you're saying is your green part is adding the 96, or what is that?
It's just it's the footprint of two 32s, right? So if you were gonna build,
Right,
if we're gonna build 96,
Right.
then, depending on what you did, but if you're just gonna straight up build 96 to add on to the existing 66 that are there, you'd either go straight up with three 32s, one on top of another,
okay,
or you'd have what you see there, and then on one side only, it would be 2 stories.
so you don't have a vertical or horizontal shot, you just have,
No, I had to.
no, okay.
When
Okay,
I
so
went to do this grading.
just in summary, the one to you, Mr. Warden, so the green area is 3 levels. If it was 96, that would be 3 levels of 32. Is that what that you're looking at there? The proposed 2-story.
Because what the parking in that was meant to take into account if there was 120.
Okay, and if you went to 160, then it would be another story.
That's right.
Okay.
Again, there would have to be further parking.
Right, but the footprint, that's the footprint, so if you went with just, because you had 3 options in there, you had just even adding 32, what would that, just 32 versus,
So if you were just to do 32, either you could just do a half of that
right?
and join it on, or I think you'd go back and look at
The fourth wing.
a fourth wing
Right.
in keeping more with what's already there. But again, I didn't ask them to
Okay.
undertake that.
No, that's fair, thank you.
Yeah, Councillor Mackey.
Thanks, Mr. Warden. So Kim, in this scenario, you could stack the 232s to have a brand-new build of 128, which would allow us then to turn the existing long-term care facility into retirement home beds, right, for our campus of care?
Whatever you wanted to do, yes.
Okay, thank you.
Councillor McQueen?
Now I'm confused, so the green area is a complete new 128-bed facility?
It could be, you could stack it as many
Oh, I
floors
see.
as you want. I was just trying to get a sense of, it's a very busy site.
Right.
With the servicing that's there as well, and where lines run and that sort of thing. So I just wanted to get a sense of what could we fit on the site
Okay.
at the base, and then work from. And so I think what that's telling you is that if you're leaving the current facility alone, what you can add.
The only reason I raised that was that sort of new conversation around the table here. A building, a brand new one versus the other one being purpose. I'm not opposed to that conversation, it's just, it's new information.
Yeah, that's right, that's right. And so when we started to look into this further, we wanted to make sure
Right.
the council had all of the information.
Fair enough.
So the next part of this conversation is with regard to some of the assessment, and I will turn it over to Kevin to have a conversation about that.
First, Councillor Mackey.
Thanks, Mr. Warden. So just for some clarity, if a new 128 was built, it would be an application of 62 new beds, not 96, just so that people are clear. The existing beds would be rebuilt and then would be transferred over, so we would be making an application for 62 beds, not 96. So the committee on Tuesday looked at, 32, 62, and 96. So we've got those three scenarios that have been reviewed. We weren't stuck on 96, even though that was the direction that had been given. We looked at the three different options. Thanks.
So just to be clear, what you're seeing here in green is the footprint that is available. And you're looking at two 32-bed pods, up and down, 32 and 32, 64. And there is a multitude of options that you could have with that. The current motion of this council is that we request 96 additional beds. So if that were the case, if it were going to be 96 additional beds, then a further decision would have to be made. Is it going to be 96 plus the 66 that are existing into a brand-new facility? Or is it going to be 96 in a new facility and leave the 66 alone in the current facility that's there? So those are the decisions that the committee is wrestling with, and Kevin is going to take us through some of those options in terms of what it would cost. I'm going to come to you. So before Kevin gets started, Councillor Burley.
Thanks, Mr. Warden. Kim, I wonder, could we pull, oh, it's gone. The plan, could we have that up there again? Could we pull the hospital parking area over so we can get a better look at it? And just make a comment on the amount of parking for that new facility, maybe might not need that much. So there is an area where
now I'm treading into Randy's territory here, and I don't want to go too far, but the amount of parking shown on the site plan for the Centre Grey Hospital may in fact turn out to be generous. There may be some opportunity for us, as I said, to work with the hospital and to be able to have some sharing of that. So is that fair, Randy?
Yeah, we would want to have some further discussions with Grey Highlands staff. Obviously, there's parking requirements in the Grey Highlands zoning bylaw that they have to address as part of the new hospital build. But we want to have some further conversations with Greybury's Health Service as well to see if there's opportunities to share parking facilities in order to try to lower the cost both for the new hospital as well as any new facility that's being built as part of Grey Gables.
Thank you. What staff started last Thursday evening is working on these performance here. We've done our best in a short period of time. First of all, we started reviewing the 2018 performance that Sienna did for the Rockwood, showing going from a 100-bed facility to a 128-bed facility. And based on Sienna's performance, and I should say based on their staffing models and how they corporately run, they were showing that there could be significant savings on that model based on how they manage their homes. What we did is went back and we worked with the executive directors and the director of long-term care and said, based on currently what's happening with all three of our long-term care homes, that doesn't seem to be a reality the way Grey County is operating its long-term care homes. So we went back and said, okay, what is the reality based on, and what we brought forward in the first package of that is what currently is being proposed by staff for the 2020 budget for our current three long-term care homes as a starting point. So these are still estimates and still being reviewed, and they need to come down yet, but I needed to start with something because To compare to Sienna's model, I think I don't believe we can achieve those unless you're going to change management of these homes drastically again. And we've tried that once and reverted away from it. So that's my starting point, okay? So then what we also did is we took, went and looked at the capital, and we looked at 3 different options here. A new 128 build so that would be, like you said, it could be various on that site. And then the 66 beds that are there, they'd be repurposed for something else. We looked at a 160 bed build, and again, that's a brand new 160 on that site. And then the 66 beds would be converted to something else. And then a third option of a 96 bed build out onto that site, and would continue to operate the 66 beds as they are, okay? I have to say there's many assumptions in these sheets, and so they're estimates, and those change, and we've done our best, but we could be incorrect in those assumptions. And what I mean by that is provincial funding. Well, we're estimating there based on what we know today. Case mix index on the new beds. Where does your case mix index come in on funding on new beds? And if you were transferring existing beds, it should be those same case mix come across for those residents and stuff. But again, I've never ventured down this with the ministry, so we just used our assumptions we had. Private premium, the private sector is building their homes that are all 60% private and 40% basic with no semis or anything like that. So we use that same pro forma in this to gain access to as much revenue as possible. Staffing levels, we did not use the Sienna model. What we tried to do is the executive directors and the director sat together and said, okay, what do they need to run 32 bed units based on the county's model? And what they did as a reference to that is then they looked at Lee Manor, which is 30 bed pods, and said, is this reasonable? And that's how we tried to do this. Other assumptions into this is overtime and unfilled shifts, modified duty, and contracted staff. We have just taken our staffing complements and the hours we have and stuff, and we didn't take into consideration significantly more contracted staff if we couldn't fill these shifts. We just looked at where we were at today. So based on the, and then the committee saw this on Tuesday, the staffing issues that are occurring at long-term care right now. So if those could get worse, I don't know, or they could get better. So we just used an assumption. So I'm being very careful here in saying, there's a lot of assumptions here, and these things could change. And but we're trying to put something together here for council to get an understanding of what the financial impact could be for these various builds. Okay. So on the first, if you go to the second page of that, the first option is a 128 bed build at Grey Gables. And as also what's going on in conjunction with this is the 128 Rockwood Terrace build. So, and why I bring that into the discussion here is we've been putting reserve funding away for a long-term care redevelopment. So I have to take into consideration that money and how it can be used for the 128 at Rockwood, and what's remaining from that funding, how it can be used then to build something at Grey Gables if that's the direction of council. So I'd like to start on that second page, the Rockwood Terrace column, which is like the third column in that 4-column section. So what we're saying here, based on what we believe our staffing models are and our provincial funding is today, and that we'd garner revenue about almost 10 million. Our expenditures would be about 11.3, needing an operating levy of about 1.4. And versus what was being proposed right now in our budget, and those are still being reviewed, but that would see about a $333,000 reduction in the operating what's being proposed today. Then into the capital construction here, what we the first section is there, you're going to build 128 beds for Rockwood and an estimate of 280,000. Here's another assumption that we have in here, and this is what we have, the best information I have today. It could be higher, could be, I don't. Is land in those numbers and stuff? These were numbers that we had gotten from Sienna. So the 128 times the 280,000 is, almost 36 million for that construction. The beds eligible for subsidy, construction subsidy from the ministry, all 128 beds for that facility are eligible. We get $18.03 per day per diem for that construction. That's over 25 years. That amounts then, over those 25 years, that you would get 21 million from the province to help build that $35 million facility. Our reserve balance that we've put away, we've got, in December, $5.6 million sitting there, so that would come off of the amount you need to borrow. So then the construction cost, net of subsidy, and the reserve funds would leave about $9 million. But the capital repayment, you'd have to go out and borrow that 35 less our reserve amount, and then your subsidy comes in as to help pay that debenture payment. So you'd need $1.7 million for that annual repayment. You'd receive construction subsidy about $842,000. And then the current budget has that $1.3 million. It's a transfer to reserve, which is the 2 debentures that fell off for Lee Manor that we put aside, knowing that we had redevelopment coming towards us and saving money, so we'd hopefully have to borrow less. So if you use then the balance of $891,000 of that $1.3 million, then your capital cost there should not have a levy impact. So that's what we did for the basis of Rockwood. And why I wanted to do Rockwood first to show is then that $891,000 of the $1.36 million, the remainder of the $469 that's in the first column comes across there to help with a build then of something else, okay? So on the Gray Gables, on this 128 build in the first column, based on our models and staffing and stuff, we could reduce about $38,000 in operating. On the capital construction side is 128 beds. If you're building a new, only 62 of those then become eligible for subsidy, because those 66 are currently classified as Class A beds and aren't eligible for subsidy. It's another question to the ministry, would they fund those when they're already Class A beds? I guess that'd be something the ministry would have to approve. But currently they wouldn't, they're not eligible. So in this model, they're not, I'm not showing them being eligible for subsidy. So you get an estimated construction subsidy about 10 million. So net of subsidy and reserve funds is 25 million. Our annual repayment there is just over $2 million. Your construction subsidy you would get annually be 408,000. The remainder of the reserve contribution that we have built into our budget would be 469. So it would leave you a budget increase of just over $1.1 million for that build. On the next performa is...
Councillor Selwyn has a question.
So on that, what happens to the value of the other beds? We're building 128 new beds, but the other buildings still exist, I assume. So where is the value of that in the equation?
I should have said that in the assumption, so I apologize. I'm not sure what that other 66-bed facility would be converted to, and we haven't done any calculations on, is that revenue neutral, is it a profit provider or not? I don't have that knowledge, so it's not here, so, okay.
If I can, our best estimate is that the 66 beds there could represent something like 40 retirement beds, but we would need to do a significant amount of research and have some expert help to really tell us what that facility lends itself to as its highest and best use, and the amount of kind of renovation or retrofit that would be necessary to take it there. So that we just didn't have time to, or direction from you to investigate that further at this point.
So I'm moving on to option 2, which is the same performer with Rockwood Terrace isn't changing on the far right side for that build. It's on the, this now is a 160-bed new build, and that 66-bed facility is being converted to something else, okay? Some savings here in operating, not significant, but you're adding a number of beds. On the capital side, you're getting 94 beds because you're adding more beds now, so you're getting more subsidy on those beds. So the subsidy's going up, but so is the construction cost of 160 beds. You're almost at $45 million for that build. So your annual payment for that borrowing would be about $2.6 million almost, and then it nets down after the construction subsidy and the remainder of the reserve funding the contribution we have, but just under $1.5 million then for that capital construction.
Go ahead, Paul.
There we go. Just a clarity on that, how, is that over a 20-year period or 10?
It's 20, what we've based this on 25 is the ministry funding is for 25 years, so that's what we developed the borrowing at is 25 at 3% interest as based on a current interest rate. So.
If I can add a little bit just around that, you know, some more of the assumptions and the risk considerations here. You see that as you build, and this is a mistake I made early on in this, understanding that we borrow all the money up front, and then the province pays us back on the capital construction on a per resident day for their 60%, we estimate, share. That 60-40 split, we don't know because we don't know exactly what it's going to cost. We know what the per diem is for construction. They've told us that. But what our costs are, we don't know. The other thing is that, remember, it's per resident day. If the day that you open your door, are you going to be entirely full? Or are you going to have beds that are empty for some period of time while the facility gets up and running and you attract new residents to your home? So for the time that those beds are empty, you're not getting any money for those. So, you know, that potentially could have some significant impact, especially on year one. So the bigger the build, the more potential there is for some risk there.
Councillor Mackey.
Thanks, Mr. Warden. Kim, just to respond, you know, I certainly understand that there is a risk, but, you know, if you take today as a day in time, there are a lot of people on the waiting list for long-term care, and there's a lot of people sitting in alternate level of care beds in the hospital. So I don't think there's much dispute that the need is there. Thank you.
Thank you. Currently, the waiting list, I can speak right off the top of my head for Grey Gables, is about 60 people on the waiting list. And the average wait is 6 months to 1 year.
We know from the last information that we got from Health Quality Ontario, when they looked across the province and said the impact of ALC on long-term care beds in this area, there was none. So in our particular area, it's not the significant concern that it is in the GTA. I know there's some, but it's not a large number.
Councillor McQueen.
Just as note, as we know, we're getting really close to the new hospital in Markdale, but that hospital beds are going from 14 to 4+1. So if we're on an average across the province that 25% is ALC patients in your hospitals, when that changes, I don't know where those ALC patients that are currently in Markdale Hospital aren't going to be there because we're going from 14 to 4+1. So there's also, that's coming at us too. And so as we know, senior, and those ALC patients are patients that can't go home. And we know that in an area where if there's only now 4+1 beds, and they're gonna have to go somewhere else. So I think that's something to keep in mind also for that area. So, thank you.
If I'm, may, Mr. Warden, we need to consider also that there have been a number of new beds announced for this area as well. So we just need to keep that into consideration when we're balancing against the needs for the ALC residents or patients and how that balances.
The third option is continuing with the 66 beds, a 96 bed build, and we run into staffing. The way this is staffed is more difficult, and again, we worked all weekend on this and stuff, so I would love to have more opportunity to spend more time on it, but we thought it was important to bring this to you. But based on our staffing models and our assumptions and stuff, we would see that's not an efficient operating model, and it becomes more, we're going to add levy to the operating side with just over 800,000. Now on the construction side, though, it drops because you're not building near as many beds, and so you're only looking at 442,000 in construction increase to your budget. So those were the various scenarios, and you can see they're all not that far apart when you add operating and capital together on those. But there's many assumptions here, and as treasurer, I have concerns about when I see a 160-bed facility. I'm not arguing the need or anything like that. It's to have two large projects going on simultaneously and that amount of boring going on at once. And I worry if our assumptions are wrong on the 128, I'm duplicating that error. I'm duplicating that mistake, but or that assumption. So it's just a concern, and I'm concerned about what we're seeing in our staffing levels of our current homes, and are we magnifying that in bigger builds? I hope this helps give you some, even if you just concentrate on the capital side of it, I think it gives you some perspective of adding to Gray Gables what it's going to cost extra to our budget. So, and that ranges from just looking at capital, that 96 bed is about 442,000 to 160 bed build would be almost 1.5 million in additional to our levy. So. And then, you know, operating, we'd have to do some more work on that for sure, but I'll take questions and try to answer as best I can.
Councillor Burley.
Thanks, Mr. Warden. I have to leave for a few minutes, so I want to make a comment before I leave. I got great concerns out of your 280 construction costs. I think you're way low. With the climates out there now, that figure could be up to 350. And it's not going to change. It's going to get worse and worse and worse. If I had the ultimate decision for what we're doing here and not saying nothing about not doing anything with Gray Gables, I don't want to get into a discussion about whether we need beds or not. That's not what I want to talk about. What I'd like County Council to do is to really think about it. This is a new venture for us, two big, massive construction jobs on at the same time. I'd really feel more comfortable if the county concentrated on Rockwood, learn from experience throughout that whole process. Keep in mind, we're building a brand new building. Learn from that process, then attack Gray Gables for the 128 or whatever we decide to go. That's the only caution I give you. That's the way I would like to see it done.
Councillor Selwyn.
On the private sector, and I've talked to a number of them recently, they're looking at a campus of care where they have retirement beds and they actually make money on the retirement beds and the retirement beds share services with an adjacent long-term care facility. And that seems to be the economic model that works for them. So a couple of questions. One is, what is the percentage difference between this Sienna model and our model in terms of operating costs? And should we not be factoring in, particularly in Grey Gables, that we have that, I know it's a lot of work, but we have the adjacent facility. So if those become retirement beds, they could actually be subsidizing the long-term care beds, because that's the model that private industry uses, and obviously it works for them, so I don't see why it wouldn't work for us.
The Sienna model, where they showed $1 million in savings, was strictly, wasn't capturing any other revenues from a retirement facility. It was strictly on their staffing models and their corporate structure that they would have legal for a number of homes. They would have clinician specialists, et cetera, for a greater economy of scales and stuff. All I'm saying is, based on what the executive directors and the directors say they need to staff and the way trying to fill shifts and stuff, we need more money to run our homes than the private. And this has been, I have to admit, I've been around here a long time. This conversation has gone on about why can the private sector do these much cheaper than the county. We have our union contracts, and I'm not finding fault with unions. I'm just saying this is what our current reality is, and that's what I'm using as an estimate to go forward here. Those are assumptions. If I know some of these campuses don't have unions involved and the lower pay rates and stuff, so those are helping them as well. But those are, again, assumptions, and we're trying our best here to give you some kind of financial number.
And I'll just add that since Sienna provided those numbers to us a couple of years ago, the funding model from the province has changed. Like this year, we see our revenue from the province reduced across the 3 homes by over $700,000. So, you know, they didn't know that then when they put those numbers in. So that has an impact.
Councillor Mill.
Thank you, Mr. Warden. So if I can understand clearly from your assumptions, Kevin, and I appreciate there are assumptions, and I do thank you for your efforts to get this to us, because this would have been very helpful 2 weeks ago, at least for me. But nonetheless, if I understand these correctly, we'd be adding a minimum of $1 million, round figures, to our current levy request. Is that correct?
Close. I think the option one is about, taking into consideration operating, it's about $808,000. Round number.
Councillor Lear.
Thank you, Mr. Warden. I'd like to know some of the history of, maybe I could ask you, Councillor McQueen, you've been here 5 years, I'm just a first-year councillor. Is this the first time that these numbers have been investigated? Like, what was done in the previous council about the $6 million bleeding a year that we're doing in long-term care? Because as a first-year councillor, it looks to me like we've got the cart ahead of the horse, where, you know, we haven't figured out why we're losing $6 million. And I mentioned last council meeting that we're completely surrounded in private long-term care homes that are profiting, and we're losing $6 million. So can you give me an example of what was done in the previous council in terms of getting to the bottom of that?
Just to be clear to the warden and to county council, I'm not sure why I'm being zeroed in on that question, but okay. So I've been here since 2010. I think I know Councillor Burley has been here and a few others. Certainly, I understand. I think Councillor Millen was here maybe when he was warden. I think there was a task force that went out and looked at why there's a $6 million cost. I wasn't on that task force. There is a report that sort of talks about that, as I understand. It certainly has been talked about, but we don't make money also on our roads. Our roads cost us money, but we provide a service. There's a lot of other things that cost us money, but they provide a service. So the question on the $6 million that costs us for long-term care versus the private side, I think you would probably, and I'm only going from conversations that I've had with certain public people, or public in large, is why do most people, and we've had that, there was a presentation at Roma, I think, last January, the desire for people who have senior care, they prefer to be in public or municipally run facility. I don't know why that is. I don't know enough detail on that. So I can't answer that question through you, Mr. Warden, to the other councillor. But again, it has been a cost that has been escalating, I guess, or has been moving on at the $6 million. But I don't have the answer why it costs us more for private versus or public versus the private sector. I don't have that answer. But I think I think it was somewhat conversations here was maybe there's a different level of care. I don't know. That would be a question that maybe would be to the director. I don't know. I don't have that answer. Well, so I guess in summary, is this a philosophical question, or is it a question for us moving forward is for the opportunity for seniors in our county is an opportunity here to get more long-term care beds. Is there a cost? I think Councillor Mackey has talked about increasing our beds. Is there efficiency level? If we're getting into that conversation about cost. We have the cost, but if we're adding more beds, do we get more efficiency in having more beds? I think that was the one question that was with regards to Grey Gables, was at 66-bed facility, moving it to the 128, and we had those numbers last year from Sienna that the 128 was more efficient even from 100. Now we're saying that there's some different assumptions there, but I guess the question maybe back to our Director of Finance is there still efficiencies in numbers? Going from 100 to 128, going from 66 to 128. I think we realized around the table there is a cost for long-term care for the county itself. And I think is there efficiencies moving forward by adding more beds to get the cost per bed down versus the overall cost?
So I just want to make sure, there seems to be two sets of questions going on. So one is about private versus public. Is there anything more to add to that? I am going to come back to your question with respect to efficiencies, but I want to make sure Councillor O'Leary has had his question answered. Anything, Kim, to add, or perhaps Jennifer, about that question around, is there a difference in care with respect to private versus public run?
So I'll start by just outlining the foundation that we are private and municipal homes are all regulated by the same Long-Term Care Homes Act. We all fall under the same inspection protocols and the same compliance expectations, so we are all regulated in the same way.
I will add to that then the difference between private and public in the way that those corporations are run really has to do with their corporate structure. And as Kevin noted a moment ago, and if you look over the period of time since we went away from the Nursing Home Act and moved to the Long-Term Care Act, there has been a tremendous amount of consolidation in the industry. So we can all name, I think, the names of the companies that have really made a commitment to being in the delivery of long-term care, and by virtue of their really significant corporate structure and the efficiencies that come from having a legal department, a clinical department, et cetera, across a whole corporation, never mind the buying power that they're able to bring to bear. we simply would not compete on a level playing field given our size.
Councillor O'Leary.
Okay, first of all, I wasn't really, I did use your name, but if anyone else wanted, I'm just trying to find out what the history is. If anyone has tried to find out why we're bleeding so much money. Because what it looks like, and I said to Councillor McKay when we talked about it, you know, if I owned a farm that was losing $200,000 a year, I wouldn't go out and buy a farm that's losing $100,000 so I could lose 300 instead of 200. And I wouldn't do that on my own ticket, and I wouldn't do it on the Grey County ticket, and that's what we're doing. We're losing, this is costing us $6 million a year. We're about to make a decision to lose $1 million or more on top of that, and we don't even know why it's costing us $6 million when everyone else is making a profit. And that's the part that doesn't make sense to me. So I shared a story with the warden this morning. I'll share it with you. It's a real life story. I grew up in a mid-class family. My dad was a welder. There was no money in the O'Leary family. 4 kids, no money for post-education, 0. My mother's now at Lee Manor. She sold her house, and I'll use fake numbers because you don't need to know how much money my mom has. But when she sold the house, and she's got $400,000 sitting there, she cut us all a check for $100,000 because she doesn't need it at Lee Manor. That's how cheap it is. So you know how embarrassing it is for me to accept that check when I'm sitting at this table losing $6 million a year? What are we doing to fix that?
Okay, Kevin, I want to make sure that Councillor McQueen's question about efficiency is also addressed. Maybe I could let Kevin go and then I'll come back to you, Councillor McQueen.
I think that there is efficiencies, and that's illustrated in, for example, the 128 new build adjacent to on that site, where the operating costs for those additional beds, we're actually seeing a reduction in the levy here in that operating cost. So I think there is efficiencies there. I just don't think they're to the extent that Sienna had prorated. And Kim was right, and I forgot that. You know, they had structural compliance money in there that the government has is ending and in 2020, and their version, when they did that pro forma, they were going to double the structural compliance money for that pro forma, and now it's all gone. So there is some reasons for why it's not all just staffing, but based on working with the directors and stuff on the hours and stuff, yeah, we can show economies of scale of more beds on the operating side. So.
Councillor McQueen?
So I guess I'll start to say that, is county council like the business of farming? I would say it's not. We don't make money on maintaining our roads. There is a standard that we have to be at a level of care. And I think in the sense of long-term care, we're obligated to have 1 home, not 3. And there's been that conversation. And I think if we go back to the history of the last 4 to 5 years, or back to 2017, the previous county council looked at that part of reducing the number of homes, and we're here today, and the resolution that was passed in January is we decided we're going to keep 3 homes. Certainly reducing 1 home is probably would be, if you look at it from a black and white perspective, that would be a way to reduce costs. This county has also looked at contracting out for our snowplow or our operating on the roadside, and what that look at, you know, looking at private business, looking at private contractors. We saw that the province has gone that way, and it maybe works, but maybe the level of service is a different level. So I guess in the sense that this county council decided that we were backing away from contracting our road service out, because why? Well, we're representatives of the people of Grey County, and I think that's a different business in the sense we're shareholders of a corporation, and we have to listen to our shareholders, and our shareholders are those that elect us to this table. And it's certainly we're placed at making those decisions as county councillors and as elected officials from our respectable municipalities. So certainly to save that $2 million per year, there's probably ways of doing it. But is there will, or is there the feeling around this table they wanted to go there? No, they didn't go there. And there's probably ways of doing that. So we're at this junction here, is we've decided in January that we are keeping 3 homes, and we have opportunity right now of applying for more beds. And I think now, philosophically, we're at that junction now. Are we looking at adding more beds to get those efficiencies up? And I remember, as I quote, the mayor of your colleague, the mayor of Owen Sound, said, if we're keeping Grey Gables, then we need to make it more efficient and we need to apply for more beds. And I think, Mr. Warden, that the discussion here today is it's good to have the numbers, as Councillor Miller is left here, but to know the numbers for our options, and I'll give our finance staff and others kudos for bringing it forward today as your best assumption. That's all we can ask, is those assumptions. And so we are here at this junction of, are we going to apply for any beds? Are we going to apply for 32, 62, or 96? I think that's where we are at this junction, Mr. Warden. We've made that decision that we're going to apply for beds. I think in the sense of it's a service that this county has decided that we're going to provide, and we're going to be in the long-term care business. And I think it's that point where it's a service that we're providing to our residents of Grey County.
Councillor Kentner.
I just, when we're talking about, and by the way, I think this has been a great conversation, and I appreciate, I've got a lot, I think, more rounded view of the whole situation. But when we're asking the question, you know, what is the difference between private and public? Am I the only person who saw on the National within the last 2 weeks where Sienna is, you know, involved in the worst scandal in modern history for long-term care, with a woman who is blind, having been confined to her bedroom for 2 weeks at Christmas this year because her room was full of bed bugs. Now, I always understood bed bugs to be almost microscopic, but I can tell you that the pictures that were shown on national television, they were as big as large bugs. So in discussions I've had with my own mayor, she says this is not our core business, but I have to ask myself, looking at our demographics, why aren't our seniors our core business in Grey County? Thank you.
Kim, do you want to add anything to that?
We do need to be very careful that, you know, bad things can happen in any of these facilities. They really can. And I just would really caution us to say that, you know, one example is indicative of entire industry, because it has happened in the public, in the not-for-profit, and in the private sector. We have to be vigilant every single day. One other thing that I can just show you quickly that might give you a little bit of frame of reference, if you can pull that other map up, Tara. We've talked in the past a little bit about demand for long-term care, and we had the data analyst run a little bit of assessment for us. So what you see on the screen right now is that population of seniors over the age of 75. And this first screen, it's kind of cut off at the top, but if you use Markdale as the center, what's the population of seniors within that 15 minutes of travel time today? And if you scroll down a little bit, Tara, oops, that's the next. I want to stay on that slide. I just wanted to show the numbers at the bottom. So do you see at the bottom where it talks about in 5 years what that population within 15 minutes will be and what it will be in 10 years? So again, just to give a frame of reference there, if the data says that 10% of the senior population will become ill enough to qualify for long-term care, this suggests what that demand for beds will be. So in 5 years, all things being equal, which is never what happens, that population of seniors over the age of 75 will be 1,082. So that suggests about if 10% of those people required long-term care and wanted to remain in the Markdale area, that gives us a demand for beds of 108. If you go slightly larger travel time, if you go down to the next slide, Tara, and this is here's a 30-minute travel time. Again, now you're getting on the fringes of that. Now you've got our other home in Durham there. You're also close to Collingwood and Meaford and Owen Sound, so people will have a greater number of choices there. Today, that population of seniors is 3,069, and if you scroll down just a snippet there, so in 5 years, when these homes supposedly would be up and running, that population of seniors over the age of 75 is 3,756. So I just give that to you as just a frame of reference. We did the same thing. If you go down one more, just as we keep going broader, so within 45 minutes, now you've got a pretty big catchment area, if you will, and if you go down and there's your 18,703. What's not on this map, because we didn't have time, was the number of beds that are available to folks. The Lynn had done that work for us a couple of years ago, but of course they're not in a position to do that today, so this was kind of a first attempt.
Thank you for that. Councillor Mackey.
Thanks, Mr. Warden. Just a couple comments. One around the minimum standards of care, both in the private sector and the public sector. I certainly agree that they're the same, but I do think that the public sector exceeds the minimum standards. So I just think that's an important point for council. And I believe Jennifer is able to give some numbers around hours of nursing, from our Advantage Care Association that we're part of, that would indicate that public does provide a higher level of nursing service. So that's one point. The second point is when we talk about the overall levy impact, and $6 million, I agree with $6 million is a lot of money. But health services cost a lot of money, whether it be from the county or from the province. To provide quality health care is expensive. The county's lucky that we're not paying into the hospitals right now. Well, we do pay a little bit to subsidize, but the general hospitals don't require any hospital or don't require any county levy. But long-term care is becoming hospital care. The chronic needs of the people that are living in our long-term care now, it's like hospitals. 10 years ago, they would have been in hospitals. So there's certainly a need in my mind. The campus of care, our neighbors to Simcoe County, in my mind, they've got it right. They have, I think it's 550 long-term care beds. Their levy contribution is $3 million, but that's because they've moved to the campus of care model. They are, as has earlier been indicated, the campus of care model does subsidize long-term care. And I really think it's a direction that this council and this county needs to go in. If it works right next door, then why can't it work here? 550 beds, levy of $3 million. We have 300 and some beds and our levy $6 million. So they're doing something right, and we really need to examine that. This is an opportunity to start down that campus of care. Thank you.
Thank you. I'll turn next to Councillor Bartnicki.
Thank you, Mr. Warden. I want to go back to a comment that Councillor O'Leary made. You made the point that large multinational privately run companies seem to operate at a profit. And I don't think anybody disagrees with that. And our CEO pointed out that both, she has pointed out in the data, the growing demand, but that Grey County does not have the economy of scale that these big companies have. And yet we are able to maintain those high standards that Councillor Mackey just referred to. But we don't have the legal, we don't have the finance departments, we don't have all of those other things, because those are provided not only on a national level, but an international level by Chartwell, by Sienna, by all Parkbridge, I forget. Southbridge. All of these big companies have those economies of scale. We don't have that as a county. My question for staff, and thank you so much for all the data today. I think we're all having our minds expanded by that. But my question is, I guess my assumption is that we are required as a county to provide publicly funded long-term care, are we not?
We are required to have 1 year to provide one long-term care home.
Councillor Soever.
I think most of my question was answered by the last map, but if you bring that back up. So basically, if you look at this map just almost reaches to the shore. There's a little sliver there where a lot of people live in that last 500 meters, I think. But anyway, so if you look at the numbers here of how many people that encompasses, 21,605, and you go back to the map before, where there's only 4,000. I mean, clearly that shows that Meaford and Thornbury and that contribute a huge amount of those beds. I mean, there's like 15,000. So that would, at 10% of those people requiring long-term care, that means that there should be 150 beds there. And, you know, when you look at those numbers, you know, that would say there's a hugely unserviced part of the population. Right now, I think in Thornbury we have like 60, most of which are Class C and will have to be redeveloped by 2025. So I think if you're looking at needs, I think this map says it all, and thank you for bringing that up.
If I may, Mr. Warden, I think when you see where the private sector is choosing to make investments, they are, I think, very attuned to where demand is likely to be, and that would be an example about why we are seeing some of the redevelopment projects coming on stream that we are, because they see where that population is going to be. If I can go back to just one caveat, I brought this forward before about comparisons to others. And I think it's, in the Simcoe County case, there's two things there. One, they have 4 times the size of population that we do, and they have some much significantly larger population centers. They also have the main campus of Georgian College within their borders that has the nursing program there. So some of the challenges that we face around staffing, they are not in the same situation that we are. So I bring that forward only for your consideration. I do think that there's a significant opportunity for us to investigate further what might work within Grey County.
Councillor Mackey.
Thanks, Mr. Warden, and through you to our Director of Long-Term Care. Jennifer, could you either confirm or deny that there's additional hours of nursing available in private, in public versus private? If you have that information, please.
Okay, through you, Mr. Warden. What I can share with you is information that's been provided by the Advantage Association. And according to Advantage, their statistics are that residents received 2.7 hours of direct care, in for-profit homes compared to 2.8 hours of care in not-for-profit homes. And when we look at our current staffing model, just calculating direct care, which is PSW, RPN, and RN time, the average for Grey County across the 3 homes is 2.76 hours. So based on their data, we are slightly higher than what they report for the private sector.
Sorry, Councillor O'Leary.
Thank you, Mr. Warden. Well, I can help out a little bit there because my mother was at Kelso Pines first because of the waiting list at Lee Manor. And I can tell you that there was zero difference in the care between one and the other. But the difference between the 2 buildings is significant. Like to stay at Lee Manor is like a mansion compared to Kelso Pines. So there's a huge difference. So that part for sure. To Councillor McQueen's points, I was with you all the way there with the, like I certainly understand the services. The 40% of the people at Lee Manor that are in basic rooms and are being subsidized, I'm all for that. It wasn't until yesterday or the day before when Jennifer gave me all this information. This is how green I am. I thought that we set the prices for private and semi-private because my mother's not being subsidized. I just figured that's what the prices are, and I thought, you know, we need to be charging more, and that's when I found out that the ministry regulates all of these prices straight across the board, and that makes it more difficult for me to understand why we're bleeding $6 million and the other ones are making a profit. I just don't understand that. So I understand the services and I agree with that, but not for people that are in private and semi-private. Like, I was born and raised in Owen Sound. I walk through Lee Manor. I know all the people. I don't know their finances, but I know what they did for a living. And like, we're getting checks. Why am I getting a check from my mother who's in a private room and we're losing, at the county level, we're losing $6 million a year? Like, we have to do something about that, and that's why I wanted to ask you about the history. And maybe used you because of your experience, Councillor McQueen. You've been here a long time. Why is it that county councillors aren't pounding their fist on the table and going to the government and saying we're losing $6 million? Like, we have millionaires at Lee Manor that are paying $2,800 a month and giving their kids their money. So when we become 65 and can't walk or we need assisted living, that doesn't mean that we just take all our money and give it away and go to Lee Manor because Grey County's going to look after us. And that's what's happening. I don't understand why any of us are putting up with that. You know, you have to have zero money to get subsidized. So if you've got $1 million for a semi-private and a private room, why aren't you charged more? Like, you should have to use your own money first, and then you can get better deals. But the way it's set up right now, it's ridiculous. So why am I getting that check? And the big surprise to me is, like, people that have been on this county council for years and years, why aren't you doing something about it? I've been here 1 year. I hate this. I can't stand the fact that those people with money are living for $2,800 a month and giving their money away, and we're bleeding. I just don't understand why that's not a concern to everyone around this horseshoe.
Okay, I'm going to go to Councillor Milne next, but before I do, I think we've had a good discussion. My sense is the information that we've received probably now makes us maybe want to give some direction to staff or perhaps back to the Committee of Management about where we're heading. So I don't know that we are getting to that. We've had good discussion, but I'm thinking we need to wrap things up and probably with some sort of direction about where are we heading. We've got a motion right now that we're applying for 96 additional beds. If that's the case, then we have the numbers, at least to the best of staff's estimation about what that means. Councillor Milne.
Thank you, Mr. Warden, and I too share your frustration, Councillor O'Leary. But for a little bit of context, I've been here a little bit myself over the years. I can tell you that there has been some banging on the tables in years past. I remember sitting at a committee meeting a number of years ago when a gentleman who was in the audience here the last time we had this discussion, pounding the table saying, why on earth are we doing this? We need one home in this county. Why have we got 3? The decision was made that we consciously wanted to have 3 homes to provide that service. So, I mean, that's a decision we made around the horseshoe at that time. The consensus was that we wanted 3 homes, and we were interested, or we were willing to invest the money and the funds to do that. We can make a different decision if we choose to here at this table. But I can tell you there has been a lot of discussion over the years why we are investing all this money into long-term care. So it's not that we've been ignoring it. We certainly have had that discussion. It's just that we made that decision to do that. And here we are again at a crossroads where we can make a different decision if we choose to.
Councillor Selwyn.
Yes. We've heard a lot of discussion here, and we've heard about discussions of economies for scale and that kind of thing. We've also heard how Simcoe County seems to run their beds more efficiently with economies of scale. So what is us to prevent us from reaching out to the other municipalities and crossing county boundaries and actually setting up a long-term care umbrella organization that has that purchasing power and can run more efficiently, because maybe you're running beds in Simcoe, Bruce, Gray, Wellington, Dufferin, all of those places. Maybe this is a governance problem.
Councillor Mackey.
Thanks, Mr. Warden, and I agree it has been a good discussion. I believe, we've all received a lot of information. The Long-Term Care Committee, the chair is not here, so I will speak as vice chair. I think, having that information, the 96 beds I do not believe is the right number for our county. I do think that 62 added on to Grey Gables probably is the right number. And when we brought forth the 96, that had been based on the January recommendation of this council. So that's why the Long-Term Care Committee had brought forth the 96. Not that anybody on the committee was convinced that was the right number. So we are gathering the information to try and get to the right number. But my recommendation would be that the Long-Term Care Committee get together prior to next council so that they can further examine and think about the conversations today and bring back a recommendation to this council on what would be the right number for Grey Gables. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor McQueen.
I guess I'll stand up this time. I think in summary, we've had a lot of discussion. There's been a lot of discussion around this table in the last 2 to 3 years. And I think to Councillor O'Leary, you asked great questions. And I think Councillor Millen has said that there has been, there was a committee. It came back last in 2017 to go to 2 homes. Here we are. We're still having 3 homes. That decision was made in January of this year. So I guess is to echo Councillor Mackey's point, is we're at the point of making an application. We don't know what the province is going to award us. It's up to them to say, well, they know that there's been a number of other private sector companies that have applied and been awarded beds for Grey County. So there's a lot of mix. Maybe we're not going to get anything. Who knows? We don't know unless we ask. But I think the decision and the discussion that happened in January and was reaffirmed in February, that we're keeping Grey Gables. Certainly, I guess if somebody wishes to bring that forward as a reconsideration, I guess that could happen. But as we moved on, and at our last meeting, we decided that we would support the 96 beds. I would certainly commend staff for bringing back these numbers, because now at least we have a more wholesome discussion. But I think that from that conversation that happened in January was, since we're keeping Grey Gables, then we need to add more beds to add the efficiency. Maybe stop less bleeding, if that's how, quote unquote, Councillor is how you worded it. So I think we're at that point. I certainly support what Councillor Mackey is saying, taking it back from a recommendation. That's why we do have that management committee set up. And certainly I still feel that 128 model, giving some new assumptions, is still the right model. We've heard that, and that's why we're going with 128 for Rockwood. That seems to be the right number, however that works out. And I remember from that Sienna report of the 128, it's the most efficient economies of scale for the numbers, for the staffing and all that stuff that seemed to make sense. So personally myself, I'm supporting the 62 beds to move on to that 128, but certainly as Councillor Mackey has suggested, to take that back to that committee from a recommendation. If that's, time is ticking. Time is ticking of January of 2020 to get that application in. And so we need to make if we need to finalize what that number is, we need to make that decision really quick and move on. As far as one other comment with regards to the chair of the long-term care committee mentioned about doing Rockwood first and then doing Grey Gables. Who knows if the beds will be available, if they will be there for that time. I don't know if we accept now and say we're not going to build. I think if in this, as I understand through Madam CEO, that there's a certain time frame. If beds that are allotted at this time have to be up and running by a certain time, so I think we're in that frame. And I guess you could look at it this way: if you're building a house next year, or you're going to wait for 10 years, do you think the cost is going to go down? Probably not. It's going to continue to go up. So I think we have to pick a period of time. We're at that period of time. Certainly, we're at a crossroad. This is a very important decision for this county council. But I will say one last comment: it's been a very divisive situation that we as Grey County councillors in the past term have been in, and I certainly would like to see us move forward and look at other things. There's a lot of other businesses that we are in, maybe that we have made that decision to be in, or we could be as a corporate or as a for profit. We could maybe get out of other businesses, but we're not. We're governed by from our elected being elected to this corporation, and like I said, we're all shareholders that represent the stakeholders, which is our public. And again, I think that maybe the 62 is that right number, and we need to move forward quickly. Thank you.
Okay, so I'm going to have, I see your hand. I'm counting 3 speakers, then I think we do need to wrap this up and move on to other items. Councillor Desai.
Thank you, Mr. Warden. Councillor McQueen touched on it a little bit. My question is with regards to the time period from the point in time when we're allotted the beds and the point in time where they have to be put into use. Do we know what the time period is? And further to that question, can that time period be extended from the onset, in the sense of if County Council does decide to go down the route of focusing on Rockwood Terrace first, from the point of view that Rockwood Terrace needs to be there's a need for it to be upgraded to a Class A facility within a finite period of time. So from the onset, can we say that we would like an extended period of time for the beds that are at Grey Gables or not?
Through you, Mr. Warden. The application process for the new beds and the redevelopment of beds that's opened at this time is a competitive process. So that's why they've asked for the applications by the beginning of January so that they can assess and award those beds. I don't have the exact date in my mind, but my recollection is that the province has made a commitment to have those additional, 21,000 long-term care beds. There's a significant number of beds that they want to see open and operating, and I want to say 2028 as when they're wanting to see that. So I think if you weren't able or willing to deliver on that, then they might not look as favorably on your application.
Councillor Robinson.
Thank you, Warden. And through you, as a member of the Long-Term Care Committee, I absolutely appreciate all of the discussion that we've had today. And I would second the motion to bring this back to our Long-Term Care Committee if that was what Councillor Mackey was so inclined to move. I think the discussion needs to come back to our committee. But I do want to just refocus our council on the fact that we do have a current strategic plan, which goal number 2 talks about supporting a healthy and connected community, and the strategic initiative, long-term care plan, a long-term care plan that meets the present and future needs of the people who live in our communities. And I think we absolutely need to keep that in mind when we are dealing with this issue before us. I too, at this point, look at the 62 additional beds, and I think that's something that we could take back along with the balance of the discussion. And also thank you to the Finance Department for preparing the financial data for us.
Thank you, Councillor Robinson. And the final speaker will be Councillor Keaveney.
Thank you, Mr. Warden. And again, I appreciate having the opportunity to listen to all of this conversation today, and will support the motion and seconded to go back to the committee to look at the 62 beds. And I just think this is an opportunity to really address the workforce challenge that seems to be one of the biggest problems in our current situation with the bleeding of the funds that Councillor Leary has addressed. And I know that we are already putting a focus on affordable housing and trying to attract more people to this region. But I'm just thinking perhaps the county can do more to lobby Georgian College to provide the training that's needed, and to perhaps lobby the province on behalf of the Four County Labour Market Planning Board for an SAO program, an additional program to support the training of PSWs. I just think we can do things to address this the workforce challenge that will help us to decrease the $6 million that these 3 homes are costing the county each year.
Thank you, Councillor Keaveney. Okay, so we've had very good discussion. I'm hearing from our clerk that we do not require a motion. The item will go back to Committee of Management, and that body will likely come up with some sort of recommendation. Councillor Mackey.
Thanks, Mr. Warden. Just wondering what the time frame needs to be to get this back in front of council. The Long-Term Care Committee, when we met on Tuesday, depending on what council's wishes, did agree that we would meet after county council today if we needed to, if there was a narrow time frame that needed to be met. So I just throw that out that, we have discussed that opportunity or availability to get that. So it would be back in front of council, I guess, the first one in December, I would think would, pardon? Sorry, November 28th. So is that a time frame that would work for the clerk?
So we had talked at Committee of Management about meeting after the November 28th. Given the discussion today, the clerk staff will work with the members of the Committee of Management to try and set up a meeting for next week so that we have some more information to bring forward to the November 28th meeting.
Thank you.
Okay, so I believe that we're ready to call a vote on the motion that's currently on the floor, which is to receive the information to adopt the recommendations therein. So I call the question. All those in favor? Are there any opposed? That is carried. I think we should take a short break and come back.